fasting as well as time-restricted eating. And research on Ramadan has found that over the course of 10 years, there's a significant improvement in coronary heart disease risk and other cardiovascular risk factors, such as improved lipid profile, improved blood pressure, improved weight, BMI, and waist circumference. They're all pretty important for preventing cardiovascular disease. But it's not only for people who want to lose weight. For example, this study found that if two groups of men who are used to doing resistance training implemented either the regular way of eating or the time-restricted feeding pattern, where they fasted for 16 hours every day and ate their food within 8 hours, then they saw that they maintained the same amount of muscle mass. But the difference was that the group that was doing time-restricted feeding, they had less fat mass and their inflammation was also lower. So it comes to show that you don't really need to be eating throughout the entire day, even if your goal is muscle growth and strength development. You can still implement some form of confinement, and actually it's better because of reduced fat mass and reduced oxidative stress. But in a lot of the cases, people tend to spontaneously consume fewer calories because of this form of eating. As was shown by this study, time-restricted eating reduced energy intake by about 650 calories per day. It didn't affect total body composition within the duration of the study. So essentially, eating at a calorie deficit is still important if your goal is weight loss. And time-restricted eating is a simple way of achieving that once you get used to it. But in animal studies, time-restricted eating is pretty renowned. And for example, in this study, these mice were put on the same amount of calories, but the only difference was the time during which they ate their food. So on the left, you have a mouse who ate over the course of 24 hours. And on the right, you have a mouse who ate within 8 hours. And yeah, the difference is quite substantial. So although the mice were eating the same amount of calories, the one who was doing time-restricted eating and ate only within 8 hours was leaner. It had less body fat. It had less oxidative stress, less inflammation, and was just generally healthier. And the reason has to do with how the circadian rhythms and food are interconnected. If you eat throughout the 24-hour period all the time, you're staying in this fed state, then you're kind of misaligning your body's circadian rhythms, and essentially you're promoting more inflammation and weight gain potentially. But we can't 100% correlate the studies in mice to humans, but it's still quite significant, or it may have some effect. So essentially, eating all the time disrupts the circadian rhythms, so to say. It creates a low amplitude. It doesn't maintain this robustness and resiliency in the rhythms. You want to have like a pretty high amplitude in your circadian rhythms, where you go through periods of low activity, so to say, and low metabolic rate followed by increase in metabolic activity, so to say. So the pattern would have to be mimicking the day and night cycles as well. It was also found that in spite of the calories consumed, the eating frequency was the kind of determining factor that determined the health outcomes of these mice. So one group of mice ate within 24 hours. They didn't show any improvements in disease prevention nor lifespan extension. The mice who ate within 13 hours, which is basically for them like 50-50, 50% of the day fasted, 50% of the day fed, and they did saw some improvements in their health. But compared to the mice who ate only within 3 hours, which for them is basically like 1 meal a day, it was very different. The mice who ate only once a day lived much more longer, and they also prevented a lot of the diseases. And the researchers of this study concluded that increasing daily fasting times without a reduction of calories and regardless of the type of diet consumed resulted in overall improvements in health and survival in male mice. Perhaps this extended daily fasting enables period and maintenance mechanisms that would be absent in continuous exposure to food. And just recently, at the end of last year, December 2019, it was this sort of a meta-analysis was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And they said that studies in animals and humans have shown that many of the health benefits of intermittent fasting are not simply the result of reduced free radical production or weight loss. Instead, intermittent fasting elicits evolutionarily conserved adaptive cellular responses that are integrated between and within organs in a manner that improves glucose regulation, increases stress resistance, and suppresses inflammation. During fasting, cells activate pathways that enhance intrinsic defenses against oxidative and metabolic stress and those that remove or damaged molecules. So one of these defense mechanisms and one of these pathways that gets activated while you fast is called autophagy. And autophagy is actually one of the central components of life extension and longevity seen in many studies, especially in calorie restriction studies. So one of the few known ways of extending lifespan in virtually all species is calorie restriction, eating fewer calories. But that calorie restriction works because of autophagy, so to say. So if you restrict or if you block autophagy with some genetic modifications in mice and you still put them on calorie restriction, then those mice are not going to live longer because their autophagy gets blocked, and vice versa. If the autophagy gets activated, then they do live longer, and that's especially like an important point. So you don't have to go on this like a starvation diet in order to live longer. You can still learn how to optimize and activate autophagy by other ways and doing it smarter, sort of way. It's like biohacking. And what are the benefits of autophagy? Well, there are many, such as reduced inflammation, stronger immune system, anti-aging. It can fight some cancerous cells, eliminates pathogens, and essentially autophagy is the process where you recycle old and dysfunctional cell components and this junk that tends to accumulate there. So if you compare the standard 3 meals a day with some form of time restricted eating, then you can see that you don't really see a lot of autophagy in the regular way of eating sleep when you're not eating. But if you compare it to something like eating once a day or 2 meals a day or whatever type of fasting you would like to do, then you substantially prolong the period where your body stays in ketosis and stays in this autophagic state where it's repairing and cleaning itself. So yeah, even just skipping one meal, whether that be breakfast or dinner, is quite effective. Research has shown that the average Westerner consumes their food over the course of about 15 hours a day. So that's literally from the moment they wake up all the way until they go to bed. So they never ever experience autophagy, or they never ever go into like a real fasted state. They may experience some of it during sleep, but that's only like a few hours, and it's definitely, or in my opinion, that's not going to be enough for maintaining optimal health. You would want to, at least, you would want to have the majority of your hours during the daytime be in a fasted state as opposed to a fed state. So if there's 24 hours in a day, at least 12 hours eaten and 12 hours fed is like the at least minimum where you would see some form of benefits. But optimally, I would say that you would want more hours spent fasted than fed. So that would be like 14 hours fasted, 10 hours fed, or 16 hours fasted and 8 hours fed, and so on. If you do eat like this, where you eat over the course of 15 hours, then that's going to cause some form of circadian disruption, and misalignments of the circadian rhythms are associated with many problems like increased blood pressure, sleeping disorders, hormonal imbalances, weight gain, as well as just increased heart rate and cardiovascular disease. It's almost like shift work. You're putting shift work is pretty carcinogenic, and this sort of eating can also become like a mild form of shift work. As you get older, it's already this sort of a trend where the circadian rhythms are becoming more misaligned. So you lose this robustness you lose the pattern or the ups and downs, the swings, and you go into more of this very, homeostasis and stagnant state. So as you get older, your melatonin secretion tends to be blunted. Older people tend to sleep less because of this. And this is also one of the reasons they are at a higher risk of Alzheimer's and those sorts of things. So younger people have this robustness in their pattern. The circadian rhythms are very resilient and kind of active. But fortunately, it's been found that calorie restriction can reverse this negative trend. It can reverse this stagnation. Calorie restriction improves or optimizes the metabolism of NAD+, and NAD+ is like a very essential coenzyme that is virtually involved in all physiological processes inside your body. So as you get older, your NAD becomes depleted, and NAD is also regulating the circadian rhythms. So calorie restriction reverses this trend, and it improves NAD metabolism. And the same applies to fasting and time-restricted eating. You can mimic calorie restriction with intermittent fasting. So time-restricted eating, you can do this. Easiest way is to do 16 and 8, where you fast for 16 hours and eat your food within 8 hours. Or you can also do some form of alternate day fasting, where you eat only once a day for normally, and then you don't eat another day. But when it comes to comparing, if either eating earlier in the day versus later in the day, then this study found that eating early in the day is better than eating later in the day. For instance, eating only breakfast and lunch is better than eating dinner. But the problem with this study is that it was done in like 11 overweight people over the course of only 4 days. So yeah, like if you compare it to the standard 3 meals a day, then it's of course better. But another study also compared early time-restricted eating with later time-restricted eating, where the hours of fasting were matched, and they found that there was no difference because the people spent more time in a fasted state regardless of when they consumed. So the most important part is still the confinement of the eating window, not necessarily of when that eating window is placed. Autophagy has a circadian rhythm, so you wouldn't want to be eating basically in the midnight because that's going to disrupt the circadian rhythms. So usually autophagy is primarily processed during sleep, so to say. When you're sleeping, actually autophagy gets gone through. And that's why it's the reason has to do with the correlation or the coordination with melatonin, which is the sleep hormone. Melatonin, the sleep hormone, modulates autophagy and essentially is very important for maintaining the circadian rhythms. So you don't want to just eat at night. And growth hormone is another thing that gets secreted most during sleep. So another reason you wouldn't want to eat at night. And here are a few guidelines that you can keep in mind of when you want to eat. So in the morning, it's not the best idea to eat immediately because in the morning cortisol rises, and cortisol is supposed to give you this jolt of energy to kickstart the day and kickstart the circadian rhythm. So eating food at that time isn't the most optimal thing to do because with elevated cortisol, you're also more prone to storing the food as fat and kind of blunting the circadian response. Instead, you would want to wait like a few hours after waking up. But you don't want to eat immediately before going to bed because melatonin is supposed to rise as darkness falls, and ideally you would want to wait at least a few hours, or you would want to stop eating a few hours before bed so that you wouldn't interfere with melatonin. And snacking in general is not really beneficial because it's going to keep you in this constantly fed state that suppresses autophagy and also just makes you consume too many calories. So it's better to have like a smaller eating window every day. And if I were to kind of hypothesize an optimal meal timing for humans, then it would be along the lines of eating between the hours of 10 a.m. and maybe 6 p.m. So then you would automatically get like a 16-hour fast every day and an 8-hour eating window. So that doesn't interfere with the circadian rhythms. So you don't want to eat when the cortisol is high, and you don't want to eat when melatonin is high either.